Aaron, take it away.
Thank you, Condra. And my heart goes out to you and your community. So that's a powerful story. And it puts a pressure on because I'm not sure I'm going to deliver anything that's important enough to justify you being on with everything that's going on. So I'll do my best. But thank you for the introduction. Thank everybody for coming on today. So my name is Aaron Emmel. I am actually not an educator by training or trade. So I want to start with that because I'm not giving this webinar to you all as an expert. I mean, I feel like I'm the one talking to the experts here. So I'm going to acknowledge that. I'm going to ask for your feedback and your thoughts as we go through this webinar. And before I dive in, the whole reason pitched this idea to Nancy to do this webinar is that I am the program director of a pharmacy technician education program that's an online self-paced program. And we work with a lot of high schools and higher ed organizations. And one of the things that's become a common theme, especially when I talk to new people that are interested in using us, is, concern that students are kind of over virtual education. And this really has challenged me to think about how we can improve what we're doing in my organization for sure. And that's something that we've been working hard on doing as we completely rebuild our program. So I have been completely obsessed with diving into the literature around learning techniques and virtual education. And being a science person myself, I'm a pharmacist and very data driven. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in PubMed looking up academic publications as well and all these different interventions. So I thought I'd share some of my learnings here with you all, and certainly looking forward to getting your feedback and learn from your expertise as well. So to start, I didn't get set up early to make any kind of official poll here on Zoom. So I think we've got a relatively small group. So what I'll do is maybe just ask everybody to put in the chat, or if you want to unmute and speak up for the next minute or so. I'd love to hear what challenges you all are experiencing with virtual teaching right now, and however you have to do it in your setting, whether it's just the asynchronous stuff you deal with in the learning management system, or if you're actually conducting synchronous online classes from time to time. Let's see if we got anything. Students staying engaged and locked in. I can believe that for sure. So thank you, Casey, for sharing that. Latina, same thing, keeping students engaged. That's the one I hear of the most. Another one I have is just fear that the students aren't and not having a way to really measure that. So that's pretty consistent with what I hear. And honestly, what I get concerned about too, and the students that are going through our program, making sure not only that they're engaged, but that they're actively learning and not just thumbing their way through online modules and readings as fast as they can. Anybody else want to share anything? Feel free to speak up. We'll give it another moment and then we'll move on. All right, fair enough. So with that being said, just kind of the agenda I'll walk through, and this isn't going to be terribly long. And again, we're going to make this interactive and we'll pause for some discussions. But I'll just kind of mention some challenges up front and talk a little bit about some research findings on online or distance education. Talk about different strategies during synchronous education, basically virtual classrooms, to make sure that students are actively participating and motivated and happy with their experience. We'll also talk a little bit about asynchronous strategies, so things that can be done outside that live virtual classroom environment for students, whether it's assigning active learning activities or encouraging group projects or case studies, especially things that are relevant to the health sciences. We'll also talk about some just basic instructional design theory as it gets applied to virtual education. And we'll give a few kind of interesting examples of how you might deliver this in a theoretical health science class. And then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A or maybe a little bit of banter as you all can maybe idealize some challenges in implementing some of the things that I'm going to share here today. And I just jotted down some learning objectives. This is an informal session, but I've been in this mode of instruction design, so I figured I had to include those as well. And the first thing I want to say is in my mind, always important to go back to the evidence. And I'll flavor this with there are things that have happened in recent years that maybe warrant revisiting some of the research on learning outcomes from virtual education versus live face-to-face education. But historically, the data has been overwhelmingly positive in the sense that most studies have showed that delivering education virtually, whether it's live or asynchronous, leads to at least similar outcomes as in-person, face-to-face education. There are certainly limitations to that research, and much of it may have more to do with the actual instruction design and the way it's delivered versus just the medium in which it's delivered. There was a big meta-analysis done by the US Department of Education back in 2010 that showed that learning outcomes were similar across those modalities as well. So the research up until then supported it. The meta-analysis or structured analysis of that data supported that as well. Now, obviously, we had the COVID-19 pandemic, which kind of incited this emergency remote teaching environment, and those learning outcomes certainly, at least in anecdotal reports, weren't nearly as well as the well-organized virtual education that existed up until then. But as we've kind of settled out of that, I think many are hoping that we'll be back to those historic norms in terms of learning outcomes from virtual education. One thing that's clearly important, it's really going to be the focus of the talk here today, is that probably the most important variable in impacting learning outcomes and student satisfaction and motivation is the level of active engagement of the students. And that's whether we're talking about a virtual class or asynchronous education as well. So it has to be designed well. There has to be purposeful interaction with students and ways to essentially force them to be active and participating in the learning experience. And I say this as somebody, by the way, that when I go back to the days where I used to be an employee and I had to complete my e-learnings, every quarter, whenever I got the email, I tried to get through them as fast as I could. And then some of the employers I had become better at their instruction design and forced us to go through the more active learning type modules. So just some general strategies. Frequent interaction is very important. We'll talk about the science behind how frequent that should be and what you should do. It's important as facilitators, and I'll try not to violate this principle here for the next 20 minutes or so, to be more of a facilitator than a teacher, at least from time to time, to really promote the students actively participating and being able to respond to open-ended questions or discussion prompts. Leveraging interactive tools within the virtual meeting platforms that you're using to host classes, making sure that there's a clear structure and pace so the students know what to expect, and encouraging the students to have that community approach. So the students should feel comfortable speaking up. They should feel comfortable coming on camera if it's something that's allowed by your institution. It shouldn't be required because obviously there may be technological limitations or students who aren't comfortable with that for some reason, but encouraged. And just making sure that there is an environment where those students feel like they want to participate. At the same time, it's also important to make sure you're not trying to do too much because there is the principle of cognitive overload. And it's important to strike a good balance in the quality of the interactions that you're promoting or requiring, as well as the frequency. So with that being said, just in the chat, if anybody wants to type in a quick strategy that you've used during live classes, virtual classes to engage students, whether it's polls or discussion prompts or questions, or maybe shared documents or anything interesting, I'd love to see if we have any interesting things pop in here. We'll give it another moment. Surely somebody's done something. Breakout rooms. Oh, Krista, that's an awesome one. So there's actually a lot of data around breakout rooms, and that's something that we are going to talk about. Games such as Kahoots and Bookits, very good. Polling software, great, Latina. I wish I would have got on early enough to do some polls or have them ready to go here in Zoom. I don't even think I see that option on my screen, but certainly those are good ones to use. So you all are already doing some of these things for sure. All right, so moving on to the next slide. And not to really get too deep into a data dive discussion, and I'll admit I didn't do the best job referencing the slides by slide. So I've got all the references at the end. That's me cramming this presentation together this week. But there are many studies out there looking at the impact of interaction during synchronous virtual education on learning outcomes. And it's pretty clear that intently interacting with students, typically at least every 5 to 15 minutes, leads to higher course completion rates if it's part of a completely online course. It improves understanding and knowledge retention. It enhances student satisfaction and motivation as measured by student self-reports, and it encourages deeper learning through active participation. And I've got some references at the end that you can go to if you're curious enough to see, what those outcomes were and for the interventions on those active learning techniques during synchronous education. So that kind of brings me to one question I was really interested to explore, and this was important to me as we were designing our online modules as well. And I also conduct virtual classes with the students in our cohorts every week. I want them to be more meaningful. So I was curious, is there actual data that tells us how frequent the interactions should be? And what I found was that there's data, and this is certainly true for adult learners. There's also evidence for this for high school age learners as well. And Nancy did give me a heads up before the webinar that the majority of the audience is high school health science educators, is that attention tends to wane after about 10 to 15 minutes. And I believe this, it speaks to me. I can't sit in front of a video or be on a Zoom call for more than 10 or 15 minutes without doing anything. And I find myself wandering and browsing the internet and doing something else. We can all probably imagine that's exactly what the high school age students are going to do. So there is evidence showing that doing short interactive elements every 10 to 15 minutes seems to be probably the minimum interval that's required to achieve those improved learning outcomes. There's even been some studies, and this one came out of higher ed, so I don't know how applicable this would be to high school, but this is a higher ed online medical education program, and they would do high frequency questioning. So every 2 minutes during this online lecture, the lecturer would pause and ask repeated questions to students, and they measured this against a similar class and a control, and those learning outcomes were enhanced with that approach as well. That might be a bit much. There certainly is some concern and some opposing evidence that if you do this too much, it does lead to learner burnout and less enthusiasm about attending online education sessions. So it's certainly important to balance frequency with quality. But I think, at least from an evidence standpoint, the takeaway is a good balance is probably every 5 to 15 minutes, have some sort of interactive activity. So that brings us to what types of interactive activities should we include? And some of you already noted that you're already doing these things. So certainly live polls is something that can be useful, really easy to do, doesn't require a lot of planning. Same with low stakes quizzes. So if you're on a virtual meeting platform where you can post maybe a quiz, you can do that in the form of a poll. Some e-learning platforms have ways to track those quiz responses and scores as well. Probably best for it to be low stakes versus something that's concrete and impacts the grade. But regardless, that's a really easy technique to put in, very easy to execute on the fly. So those are good. Structured questioning and discussions can be very beneficial as well. And this can be something as simple as putting it into the chat or pausing and posing the question to the audience and waiting for the responses in the chat, or really encouraging that live spoken response as well. And it is important upfront to probably set the expectation that you do expect participation in that. And if you're not getting it, it's probably time to start calling out students by name. Breakout rooms, there's actually a lot of data around the impact of breakout rooms, and some experts suggest that for every virtual teaching session you do, let's imagine you do a virtual session with a class every week, it's 60 minutes, there should be at least one breakout session during that room. It does a couple of things. One, it forces that active participation. Two, it gives students a sense of community, especially if it's done in a space where the teacher is removed from the environment. There's some evidence that shows that social community and safe space for students increases enthusiasm about participation. Some students aren't comfortable speaking up in front of the teacher out of fear that maybe they're going to be judged for not knowing enough about what they should know or whatnot. So they're typically more comfortable sharing things with their peers. And again, that collaborative discussion in the breakout room and then having them come back out into the main room and share their conclusions or thoughts that they formulated as a group can be really beneficial. Multimodal tools, chat, emojis, shared docs. So I guess I'd pause now. Emojis is something I've started using a lot in our virtual sessions just to kind of gauge the temperature of the room. So give a thumbs up in the React tool here in Zoom if you've used emojis, or encourage your students to use emojis during virtual classes. Oh, I got some coming in the chat. We got some hearts in there. That's perfect. I love it. And then social and emotional check-ins as well. So it's important to break from time to time from the academic stuff and just make sure the students are doing okay. Is everybody tracking? Does anybody have any concerns? If there's something important going on, with students as a group to stop and discuss, certainly bring that up. One-on-ones you can do in direct messaging to students. But again, fostering that sense of community and making sure the students know that you care genuinely about them, above and beyond just the scholastic or academic purpose of the virtual class. So the key takeaways from the synchronous education are just planning ahead. Have a game plan going into your virtual class session. Make sure you're doing frequent and purposeful interactions, balancing quality and quantity of engagement, leveraging all the variety of formats you have at your disposal with the technology, making sure you establish that clear expectation of normal participation from the students. So that's the easy stuff, I would say. And I know I'm talking to the experts here. You are probably already doing that, and you can be rest assured that the evidence supports that does enhance learning outcomes for your students. I think one thing that people probably struggle with a little more, and this speaks more to me since, my program is truly asynchronous. Our virtual synchronous sessions are optional for students. So all of our student outcomes and their complete completion of their program comes from their asynchronous activity in our learning management system. And this is something that I have been probably way too obsessed about. Probably lost a lot of sleep on how to optimize this, but how do you ensure that the students have a good learning environment from an asynchronous content delivery standpoint? And we're going to go through some of these items here, and we'll talk a little bit about the evidence, hopefully without boring you too much about it. But a few things do stand out for sure. One is that having clear and organized content is extremely important. It should not be confusing at all for the students to understand what's expected of them, the hierarchy of how they complete all of the activities or assignments that are required of them in the learning management system. If you're delivering content via recorded video, so the students are, watching lectures asynchronously, the evidence shows the shorter, the better. So on the slide here, I've got 5 to 15 minutes. Some studies will cite more like 3 to 10 minutes, but the more micro learning approach with recorded videos does tend to lead to better outcomes than longer recordings. And for the same reason we talked about before with the synchronous education, that attention span's pretty short. So after 10 to 15 minutes, it's going to be hard to retain engagement. Making sure that the students have things to do that they have to actively participate in. So while knowledge can be gained from passive reading and activities, if the students have to actively formulate ideas or apply critical thinking to some of the concepts that they've learned through some sort of activity, that's really going to foster the development of their knowledge and possibly allow them to develop some application skills as well. Making sure that there's some forum for the students to get timely feedback and hopefully interaction with their peers we'll talk a little bit about. And then certainly having some expectations on timing and scheduling of how they're supposed to progress over time. So I think about this from my perspective of somebody who's got a structured self-paced program. It might be a little different for you all as educators when you're probably doing a lot of things in the classroom environment, maybe doing some virtual classes here and there. The students have an LMS that they're supposed to upload assignments to. So I'll try to keep that in mind, but I think most of these principles will still apply to that scenario as well. I was kind of putting this slide deck together and I meant to take this one out because I'm going to iterate most of these here in some other slides, but there are some general instruction design principles that are really important when it comes to distance asynchronous education. That active learning one is big. We'll talk a lot more about that. Gamification, probably less of an instruction design principle, but just a technique you can employ to enhance engagement. We'll talk about that briefly. I don't know as a high school educator if I'm going to be wanting to put in the time to set up a system in the LMS to do that. But as these platforms get more and more sophisticated, and as AI starts doing things for us a lot easier, maybe that's something that'll be achievable in a reasonable amount of time relatively soon. Adaptive learning is also something that's really emerging with a lot of these learning management system platforms, and of course, the acceleration of generative AI. And cognitive load, that principle that I mentioned before applies, where you have to be very cognizant of not overwhelming the students with too many things to do. So I already mentioned, if you're doing any kind of video lectures that the students have to go in and watch, making sure they're short, 5 to 10 minutes each, making sure those segments are focused on one specific topic at a time. That's another important concept as well. So it does help with that design, material design. If you're only focused on one topic, it's a lot easier to condense that down into sort of a micro learning experience in 5 to 10 minutes versus if you're trying to present multiple different concepts. Um, Inserting quick knowledge checks, if you have that capability, is really important as well. So I've been completely pivoting the way that we're developing ours, going away from, kind of a recorded video lecture approach to using a true SCORM compliant interactive platform where, yes, there's lecturing components to that as well, but there's also interactive activities that the students go through, whether it's quizzes, role play activities, or simple interactive elements where they have to click things or match things. Discussion boards can be really useful. So I guess I would pause here as I'm talking through this. I'd be really interested in the chat because, again, I'm not in the high school environment. I'm not sure what's normal these days for you all, but do you all have discussion forums in the LMSs for your high school students, and do you utilize those? And if you have any examples on how you do that, please share it in the chat. I'd love to hear about it. I'm sure it'd be instructive for everyone else as well. But there certainly is some evidence on, doing more of an open-ended prompt for students after they've been in a live class, or you've gone through a virtual session, or they've had to complete some tasks asynchronously in an LMS, prompting them to go into a discussion board with some sort of reflection activity or some sort of case scenario that they have to formulate thoughts about. That can enhance learning outcomes. And again, you're basically forcing them to apply some critical thinking as well, and then encouraging them to comment on other students' posts as well. So you're approaching multiple facets of some of these interventions that are proven to improve learning outcomes. So you're forcing that active participation, forcing them to require some critical thinking and reflective thoughts to the material. And you're also encouraging that peer-to-peer engagement and fostering that sense of community. So encouraging that meaningful peer responses is really a key element to do that. And then making sure to be actively participating in that discussion as well. And I don't know if I've got another slide that talks about this, but as an instructor, there's definitely evidence that shows the more involved the instructor is in these asynchronous activities, the more motivated and satisfied the students tend to be. They feel better supported. So, making a commitment, and I know it's easy for me to say. I just can only imagine how busy high school educators are these days, especially. But if you can, you know, participate in those discussions or provide feedback to the students within a reasonable amount of time, that will certainly enhance their experience. Checking the chat. Nobody had anything to share on the discussion board stuff. That's fine. But if you do think of something, please do put it in. All right. Another one, and this was really interesting, and I don't know if any of you all have done this, but there's some emerging evidence that doing these asynchronous video responses can enhance learning outcomes. And this is something where you, as a teacher, may have a very short video that you post to your asynchronous discussion board, or whatever learning management students system the students are working in. You post a short video. It can be you giving an instruction or asking a provocative question, or perhaps a short video of a scenario. And if in the health sciences, maybe it's a scenario as a medical assistant, and how do they handle this situation with a patient coming in? And this is what the provider is expecting. And then you have the students upload their own video responses to the scenario where they're describing what they would do. Um, I can see this be challenging. And when we hear a story yeah, what's going on in Kentucky right now, obviously, it does bring me back to the thought that we have to always remind ourselves about the need for equity and access for students. And not all students are going to have the equipment at home to do this. They might not be in circumstances where they can, but this is something that is emerging as a technique to enhance learning outcomes in asynchronous environments. I'm going to pause because I see something in chat, and that, yes, Condra, we are a Google school, so we utilize Google Classroom as a feature to add a discussion question. I use it often. Awesome. So Condra is doing the good work. And anybody else using Google Classroom, that sounds like an excellent feature to take advantage of. Another way that you can enhance that peer-to-peer engagement, and again, this is just another tool in the toolbox to do these active learning activities, is to have students build knowledge together using collaborative documents. So in the example of Google Classroom, which I have to admit, I've actually never used Google Classroom, but I would imagine being a Google product, there's probably shared Google workspaces or Google Docs that you can post in and ask the students to each add an element to them, or maybe assign a group of students to a particular document, and they work together to build out the response or the case scenario that they're going to present, or whatever it is. And again, that's just another way that students can work together remotely and asynchronously, but still having some sense of community and peer-to-peer involvement. And then other communication tools. So I will say that one of my favorites is the messaging feature in the learning management system that we use. And I share this because I would say probably the one thing that our students appreciate more than anything, when we get feedback from students, it's always overwhelmingly positive about the level of engagement that they get. And I don't hide this, and I'm very transparent about it. But what we do in our learning management system is we configure an automated message that goes to students when they've completed one of a few different tasks. So it's kind of a way to, because we have a lot of students and we work with a lot of organizations, I couldn't keep up with all the students manually that way. But this does give the students a sense of, okay, somebody's checking in on me, and it tends to be a prompt for them to reply with something. And then once they reply, I've got the bandwidth to go in and handle all the replies myself. But that has been something that's enhanced the student satisfaction with our program dramatically. So if you have that opportunity or that type of feature in your learning management system, it might be something to play around with, because again, it can save you a little bit of time in surveillance, but still accelerate the amount of interaction that you're having with students. So that's something that does tend to keep them supported. It doesn't have to be automated. You could certainly use the features manually, but that's just a little tip that I've come up with that has worked really well. Announcements can be something that can also enhance engagement, and again, improve your visibility as a highly engaged teacher and instructor. So posting weekly wrap-ups and previews, or maybe expectations, certainly can be helpful. And another really important feature, and I think we're going to implement this when we make our updates later this year, is having a private student lounge. And again, I imagine there's all sorts of policies and procedures that have to be considered when doing something like this, but having an unmonitored space for the students to be able to engage with each other. So again, giving them that avenue where they've got a safe space to maybe vent their frustrations or concerns, get some peer-to-peer support without the fear of, what's my instructor, what's my teacher going to think about this? Now, obviously, especially when we're dealing with high school age students, there's going to have to be some guardrails around that, maybe some clear expectations in terms on how a forum like that is used. But again, there is emerging evidence that that does improve the student experience. And if anybody's implemented anything like that, I'd be interested to hear about it. And I imagine most people I'm talking to here on the webinar, are primarily live. So we have worked with a lot of virtual high schools, and I've been thinking about asking them if that's something they've done or they'd be open to having, even if it were just specific to the program that we're working with. Just some other active learning activities that the students can do asynchronously, and these can be posted as assignments, or there may be features in the different learning management systems that you're using that facilitate these. Case studies, obviously, as a pharmacist, one of my favorite things, coming up with patient cases, presenting a scenario, testing a specific area of knowledge in that scenario. Whether, for your students, it's diagnosing or maybe a communication challenge or an ethical dilemma. These can be great ways to really stimulate student participation and really activate that knowledge. Problem-based learning, we're given, again, maybe you assign a group of students to tackle a specific scenario or dilemma where they have to work collaboratively, and this can be done with a shared document, or it can be done offline and the students submit the report, together or whatever it is. Another really important active learning technique would be reflection. And you can promote this through having the students maintain a reflection journal. And some of these platforms have features where the students can maintain a journal, or that journal can simply just be a free text box as an assignment or as a section within whatever portion of a course that they're working through. And there's a lot of software, and I've been going to some health science education conferences that I think I saw some really interesting things in Glendale last fall. And there's all sorts of really neat technology coming out, as far as virtual reality and augmented reality and online simulations for students to be able to do in the health sciences. So might be out of the reach of the budget for a lot of high school programs, but certainly something to leverage if you can get access to. I was going to kind of skip this because I didn't think that was too relevant to the group, because you probably don't have active decision making capacity for your LMS and things like that. So you're probably stuck with what you've got. But if any of the health science leaders, or if somebody on is in an admin capacity, that's certainly something to consider too, because there are many different learning management systems out there. I went through the LMS vetting process in the last 6 months because we're going to move platforms. And this is something that we took very seriously to make sure we had all of the security features we needed, as well as all the learning features that we wanted and analytic capabilities that we wanted. So I think, just kind of wrapping up the informal discussion, if we think about application in health sciences, I just formulated a few this morning. And of course, I'm a pharmacist. I do pharmacy technician education. So I framed all this as in pharmacy technician education. But an example peer-led reflection could be one looking at dispensing errors, where students pair up to review each other's short reflections on a real or maybe a simulated dispensing error. The students could go through a mock root cause analysis, where maybe each student takes a role in the pharmacy and they go through an interview process and try to find out where the system broke down. That could be a neat active learning experience that teaches the students how to go through a quality assurance project and how to apply some medication safety principles. Another may be, and again, this may be a stretch, a little bit ambitious for the high school cohorts, but doing that asynchronous video discussion where students have to record 2-minute mini demonstrations of a drug mechanism, or they explain how a drug works, and classmates have to watch it and post follow-up questions or clarifications. Or you could simulate this in a live synchronous classroom environment. And then a discussion board idea. So just prompting the students that they have to go into the discussion board and share one drug food interaction and explain how it works and what it means for a patient clinically. And then require students to go on and comment on others as well, either expanding, countering ideas, etc. So it could be fun for sure. I geek out on pharmacy stuff, so I might be enjoying this too much, but I can think those would be neat activities for the students. So that being said, the key takeaways, interaction plus presence plus active learning equals engagement. So the three things that we can do in a virtual environment to enhance outcomes the most is make sure, and I think I've gone now at least 15 minutes without having some sort of interaction with you all, so I may have violated this, but having an interaction every 5 to 15 minutes, being there and present as an educator, making the students aware that you're present by actively participating in those asynchronous forums, especially by promoting active learning activities. Those three different things we can do the most, at least from an evidence-based perspective, to enhance learning outcomes. So I would challenge all of us, and I'm challenging me most specifically, because I've had gone through this process and it would be a waste if I didn't implement it myself. But to try to come up with one new synchronous and or asynchronous strategy that you can deliver to your classroom, and possibly explore one new tool that supports active learning. That would be, I guess, next steps or challenges as maybe hopefully an outcome of learning from this activity. And the handout hopefully will be easier to read than here on the screen. I'm looking at a really tiny version of this, but these are the references that substantiate the comments that I've made during this lecture. Certainly take a look at these if you're interested to dive into the evidence. There's plenty more I could have cited for sure, but I was definitely running out of time and putting this together. So with that being said, you all have been kind enough to sit here and listen to me for this last 20 or 30 minutes or so. So I would really love to hear you share your experiences. If you have any questions or thoughts, or maybe some challenges. Maybe some of this is too aspirational. I'd love to hear what you all think since you do this day in and day out.
Erin, this is Nancy Allen, and I know you aren't here to promote your Pharmacy Tech Scholar program, which is a virtual pharmacy technician training program, correct?
That is correct. I'm trying to be good. I'm here for the betterment of the teachers.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I'm not trying to promote that to the audience either, but I do find something different, I believe, about what you do with your students that maybe some other programs do not, or that I'm not aware of. Don't you have meetings with them so that it's not all completely online? That tell me a little bit about how you get your students together or how you support them
Yeah.
to keep them engaged and interested in the content.
Yeah. So, okay. I do appreciate that, Nancy. And I certainly wouldn't want to come on and do it. So I'll disclaim up front, when it comes to other programs, I'm sure other programs do great things. And there are other great programs out there. So I certainly don't want to say that we're doing things that nobody else is doing or doing things any better than anybody else. But I do genuinely care about making sure the students are engaged. And again, I have obsessed over this, especially as we're rebuilding the platform for an update this year. We do virtual classes every week, and I encourage the students to attend. We try to drive attendance to that. We have a discussion board and a news feed on the student homepage in our LMS. And I post a video every week. This is what's coming up. This is what we're going to talk about in the virtual classroom. If you're struggling with this piece, I highly encourage you to attend. And we always do a live Q&A at the beginning. We get really good participation in those, and the students tend to be enthusiastic. And the other thing that really has promoted my interest in trying to figure out how to maximize this is when we look at our learning outcomes. And for us, the only real learning outcome we can see is whether or not the students pass the certification exam that many of them are doing our program to qualify for. The ones that pass typically have engaged in some way, some form or another. They've come to the virtual classroom, they've sent messages on the message feature, asking questions back and forth. They've emailed, I may have spoken to them a few times. When they reach out, it's typically somebody I recognize because I've engaged with them some way. When we get a student that reaches out and they're upset because they went on and passed the exam, a lot of the times, I would say the vast majority of the times, I don't recognize the person's name. They've never come to a virtual class, they've never engaged. Um, I don't look at that as the student's fault. That's my fault because I didn't program the course in a way that encouraged them to do that. So that's why I've kind of gone back to the drawing board and how do we improve engagement? That's just my thought process, Nancy. And again, that was as I'm going through this, I said, okay, I could repurpose this and do a webinar for the NCHSE group because I think these learnings really are instructive. And the more that we can do to encourage student participation, the better that they will do. So I danced around your question, but that's
Yeah, I knew you had a feature built in your course, and some of the teachers may have something. Um, Maybe someone could unmute themselves. I know in my area, there's no longer snow days or makeup days for weather or whatever. So they all have to have, I guess, like virtual lesson plans ready to go. Um, are all you do, is that the way it is across America? Because, I'm not in the classroom anymore. So anybody want to unmute and tell us kind of what you do in your school district if there's an opportunity to for students to not come to school?
somebody is actively out on a snow day.
Yeah. How do you manage not having a makeup day, or do you still have makeup days in your school district?
I know in Missouri, it's a mix and match. Um, a lot of school districts have went to what they call AMI days. And others still will let them off, or I think it kind of depends on how rural they are and if students have good Wi-Fi access and all of those different things that have to come into play. And if by chance they give all students Chromebooks and all the things, but we're seeing more and more of that. In fact, I think in our state there's some rule changes coming that are going to kind of require that of our school districts next school year, so that there isn't all of these missed days. And then, because what happens in Missouri is like this week in particular, we have all of this snow and the temperatures are very, very low. So even if they get the roads cleared, they're scared to put kids out at the bus stop. So then what they have to do is forgive school districts for all the dates that they miss, and then they just can't make that up. So I think this is going to be the new alternative post-COVID to kind of take over from that. And I don't know if that's normal for everybody, but that's kind of what we see in Missouri.
Yeah, I see a few things in the chat about virtual learning days and then traditional snow days. But I guess I was thinking that these pre-prepared virtual lessons that you teachers on this webinar perhaps have to develop, I suppose they would be fairly generic because you wouldn't know exactly where you were going to be in your pacing guide. So you would do things like, I don't know, medical terminology. Why don't you share in the chat like some of your, if you have virtual lesson plans that replace snow days or makeup days, what kind of topics do you are good for that type of instruction?
And while they're thinking about that, another thing I'll throw at the group. So another interesting finding that I came across in all this research was that blended learning, so combining online, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, with live in-person education, had the best combined outcome of all approaches, whether it was virtual only, in-person, live only. So again, many of you, especially in some of these areas of the country, may have challenges where not all students are going to have equitable access to technology. But even if you have the opportunity to start doing more asynchronous things in a virtual environment to supplement what you're doing in the classroom, that could be a way to enhance learning outcomes further. Employability skills modules. What is that, Shelley?
There's a couple different companies out there that are offering like things very specific to kind of those soft skills that are necessary. And that's been something that in our state we have currently an IRC committee, or those industry recognized credentials, and they've been looking at more of those as an opportunity, because it's always what we hear from employers, that what you need more than anything is a student who can come in with that skill set, and that a student is teachable. And so I just happened to be in a group like listserv text this week, and they were talking about it, and several schools have started to implement that, since we are in kind of snow across our state right now.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Hmm.
It was interesting. I guess Lissa's too shy to unmute herself, so she put it in the chat. But she said they can't do anything that would count for a grade because not everyone has access to technology at home. So
That's obviously a barrier. And again, without knowing better, I suspected that could be a concern for sure. And I share the concerns about whether somebody will do something if they have to or not. So internet connection is unstable. Do you still hear me?
yes,
Am I back? Oh, there we
you
go.
had a stroke for a
Um,
minute, but you're back now.
I'm back. I'm back. So one thing we're kind of struggling through right now is in our asynchronous material, I want to implement the reflection journal concept. So after the student completes the module, they have to go in and well, there'll be some sort of prompt. Okay, imagine you're working in a pharmacy, or what's the one thing you're going to implement from this module, or give them a scenario. And then have them type it into free text thing, or maybe there's a virtual reflection journal for them to maintain. But I'm not going to be able to monitor that. So I'd have to kind of premise it with, this is for your own reflection. Your responses won't be graded or reviewed. Is it worth doing it? You know, are the students going to do it or not? I'm not sure. That's one thing I've been thinking through. All right.
Yeah, I will speak up on that. I don't use discussion boards for that reason. One, I don't have the time to read everybody's. And I know when I've done professional development and we have to write a discussion board, you write as minimal information as you can possibly get away with, and just a bunch of words on the paper, because you know nobody's really reading it and
Yeah.
responding to other people. So I'm not good at that. I know there are probably teachers out there that can do that really well, but you'd have to have, I think, great prompts for
Yep.
them. And plus, students just don't know how to write, which I know that's good practice to get them to do that, but it's a struggle just to get them to put 2 words on a piece of paper.
I mean, that's the reality. So definitely point well taken, Lissa. And Casey sharing most of her high school students wouldn't do anything they don't have to. Which again, if I take myself back to high school, I would agree with that. I did things I wanted to do. Or things
I'm
I absolutely
remembering
had to
my
do.
time I'm remembering my time as a classroom teacher, health science, and our work-based learning would be like Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, like 3 mornings, and then we'd be back in the classroom on Monday. And so on Monday, we would do, I didn't know I was doing it, but I was doing reflection journals. So they would write, all about their work-based learning experience, and I graded it. I mean, I must have had more time then, I don't know, but I mean, I read them all and corrected it for grammar, and we
Wow.
just do
Wow.
they
That's
probably just do
amazing.
chat GBT now, right? Because that's what I do. But anyway,
That's funny.
but anyway, I must have been ahead of my time then. All right. So I had to throw that out. So I sound like I knew what I was doing at some point
I
in.
love it. Well, as I said, I was intimidated to come on here because I'm talking about a subject where you all are the experts, not me. So proof in point.
Well, we sure appreciate it. Condra, did you have anything else you wanted to add? I know that you're the host. I'm not trying to take over, but I know you might be cold wherever you are too.
No, thank you so much, Erin. This has been wonderful. There's so many things, just thinking and reflecting myself back on